thank you for those that have joined a little bit early. Just for the housekeeping piece, this call is being recorded. So if you want to share it with others, and we will, just know that it's recorded. Also, we hope this be interactive, and please, if you do have a question, put it in the chat box, and after presentations, then we'll go to the chat box. We'll call on you and have you unmute yourself so you can ask the question directly. If you are not an Upstream Alliance subscriber and would like to be, please put in the chat box to Erica Ball that you would like to, and she'll sign you up. And we believe in quality, not quantity. We like to think our programs are, and our emails are very valuable and useful. So a little bit of a promotion for the next program. It will be in 2 weeks, so we're going to more of a 2-week schedule now. But in 2 weeks, it's going to be about the election results. And our assumption is that in 2 weeks, we'll have a verified election. And if a Democrat wins, Charlie's agreed to be on that panel. And so we've invited about half a dozen people to give us perspectives from throughout the Mid-Atlantic, what happened, who got elected, and what that means for conservation and our issues. So that should be a great program on Wednesday, November 11th. Please join. And then finally, for those that don't know Upstream Alliance, we work in partnership with organizations for clean water, coastal resilience, and public access. Many of our partners are on the program tonight. And thank you, Jim. I just see a partner joining. And in our partnerships, our particular signature is taking influentials that can have a responsibility and able to put input in on those issues. There's 3 issues on the water experiences. And given the fact that we've been limited a bit, we have done some experiences. We started these programs to make sure that what's happening out on the water and that our network continues. So thanks everyone for joining. So let me stop there. I see a number of people coming in. Welcome to the program. And it's my honor to announce and to begin the program tonight. Let me just give a quick round of introductions. Verna Harrison. All of us in the Chesapeake know Verna's fame for many, many decades. Among other things, as Erica Ball, a great fisherwoman, goes out and fishes for striped bass. It's because of Verna, who was able to put on a moratorium for striped bass many moons ago, that species recovered. That and many, many other things in the Chesapeake, and very, very happy that we recruited Verna to come to the Delaware to kind of help a number of efforts here, but particularly the American Littoral Society and the University of Pennsylvania Water Center. So second, Tim Dillingham. Tim has been around the block for quite a long time and very well respected across the nation as the executive director of the American Littoral Society. So Tim is one of the powers of policy in our region, particularly in the Delaware Bay, and really kind of leads a lot of the thinking and the policy behind trying to clean up the Delaware. And then finally, Carl Russick is the director of programs and applied research at the Water Center at Penn. He's a great partner, I know, of Tim and Verna, and the 3 of them are banding together to do everything they can to make sure that our waters are swimmable on as many days as possible. So thank you to the panel, and I think I can turn it over to Verna.
My pleasure to join you tonight to share information on a wonderful project that I'm privileged to support, to bring more people, more places, in more times to swim, paddle, and enjoy in this particular section of the Delaware. So Erica, if you don't mind putting the slides on. And I will go ahead and flip to the next one. This program is going to give you a little taste test of this particular project. I'm going to talk a little bit about the geography of the river for those who are more familiar with the Chesapeake, but there's a number of folks from the Delaware, so forgive me for going into information that you already know. Then I'll turn it over to Tim Dillingham to talk about why this matters and who should be involved. And then to Carl Russick to talk about the scientific analysis of a roadmap to go forward. So this story about one of the nation's most important rivers, and it's the source of drinking water for 15 million people, including New York City, Philly, Trenton, Wilmington, is a story of progress and potential to provide people with a place for enjoyment and to swim and kayak and do other on-water, in-water activity, as well as economic benefit. And heaven knows we need both of those these days. So if you want to switch to the next slide. I want to start with appreciating the support from the William Penn Foundation for this project. They have provided not only the funding to the Water Center and to the American Littoral Society, but they've also provided guidance and advice from Nate Boone, who is the Senior Program Officer, and I would be remiss not to note that. So I'm going to slowly go through this and the goal of the project, and you'll hear more about it. But it is to promote fair and equitable opportunity to get more people, more often, in more places, swimming, fishing, paddling, and enjoying this 27-mile stretch of the Delaware River, which flows past Philadelphia, Camden, and Chester. Now, we're going to unpack that as we go forward tonight. So next. For those of you who are not as familiar with the Delaware, this particular slide shows the extent. It's a 330-mile river, and it goes from New York all the way down into the Atlantic. And then if you can see in the middle, there's just this little teeny red section of 27 miles that goes by Philly, Camden, and Chester that is not officially designated for swimming. And the purpose of this project is to develop a roadmap to change that. So next slide. In the past, and I love this quote, you can smell the river from an airplane. Well, that sounds like it's a bit much, but basically we know that people who lived only a couple of blocks away from the river were either not able to get to it or were told not to get to it. And we also know that some of the advocates that are actually working to improve it have not seen what they're working on from the river. And so that's been a pleasure to work with Don and change that. This year, American Rivers designated the Delaware River as its national river for 2020. And so it is showing, I think, in a clear way how things have improved. So next slide. These improvements go to a lot of places, and we should acknowledge the Delaware River Basin Commission, the government agencies, clean water utilities like the Philadelphia Water Department and the Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority, and the advocates. And so as we'll talk in a minute, it meets bacteria standards in the main channel most of the time, and those are the standards that are important for swimming. And not only that, but that communities are now turning to face the river and embrace the river, both in terms of access and in terms of development. Next slide. So these major improvements are leading to youth engagement. And this is a slide of kids, youth from Urban Promise. And I find this just one of the most fun parts about this project. There's a number of organizations that are getting youth out on the water, and in some cases, even in boats that they've made themselves. Next slide. So other improvements leading to swimming and paddling and some kind of a paddle sport. You might recognize the person holding the yellow paddle, and I will have to say that they were actually connecting one with the ping pong balls, one to the other. So, and the person who's swimming, she'll be nameless, but a lot of good activity going on in the back channel. Next. So, and there's always a but. As you saw, people are out on and in the water. But the purpose of this project is to identify places where they can safely swim in days when there hasn't been rain, because as you saw, people are getting out. So we have to be able to take action to make it safer for them. So next slide. So how are we going to do this? And this is kind of where I'm going to lead into a transition, but I want to make this point strongly. We need to make the most of current obligations. Philadelphia, like Baltimore and the district and many places, is currently under a consent decree and must do certain things. So how do we take advantage of the need to take advantage of the fact that there are requirements that these improvements be made, and maybe have them implemented at a different time sequence than currently thought? Use state revolving loan funds. And I saw the wonderful Andy Cricken join a minute ago, and he has successfully done this in Camden and improved the quality of the river in his area without ratepayer increase. Innovative financing and new technologies. Next slide. So this is I'm trying to make this fun because it's after 5. What action can be taken? So enter the Returning to the River roadmap. And so in a minute, Tim Dillingham, as the executive director of the American Littoral Society, is going to tell you a little bit about why this matters and who should be involved. Next slide. And same. What action can be taken is Carl Russick is going to go through some of the parameters of the study that is being done, a scientific analysis to ascertain what cost improvements and where, and what are the opportunities for these improvements, and additionally to develop an approach for a public notification system. So next slide. I think we turn it over to Tim. And thank you very much. I will come on in the end after Tim and Carl have spoken, because I always like to have the last talk.
The last word. Great. Thanks, Verna. Thanks to Donna and Erica and Upstream Alliance for having me on. I loved talking to this group and this community of people that join these sessions. One, because there's a very high probability that many of you know what the word littoral means without my having to explain it. And many of you have connections back to the Chesapeake, which is, I grew up in Annapolis and went to college in St. Mary's, and I still have family. I live right on the bay. So I have a deep connection to, all the work and the accomplishments that have happened there, and the lessons we've learned. And now I'm lucky enough to live on the Delaware River in a little town of Hopewell, New Jersey, right where Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas Eve prior to the Battle of Trenton. So I love this river. I've been privileged to have paddled much of it, to have fished it, to have swam in it. So I'm very excited about this work that we're doing and the partnerships that we're engaged in trying to move this idea of returning to the river forward. The nation made a huge promise to itself back in 1972 that we would ultimately have all our waters to be fishable and swimmable. And that simple phrase, that simple characterization just has so much power in it to me, because I think about the benefits that having these resources available to me, having clean water, clean rivers, clean coastlines available to me and to my life and to my family have brought benefits in what they've meant to me. Could I have the next slide, please? As Verna talked about, the river, much of it is greatly improved from where it was when we were misusing and abusing it and turning our backs on it. And we really, to me, that's a testimony to democracy in action, to people both demanding better for this river, for recognizing and having a vision as to what could come from a clean river, having the intelligence and the smarts and the savvy to understand how laws and policy get made in this country and how we can then effectuate that and bring a commitment along with it. The tremendous investment that was made not only through the Clean Water Act, but by the Delaware River Basin Commission starting even earlier in 1961. So, we had the results. We're sort of standing on the precipice, as Verna talked about, that for many, many days, this river, and for most of its miles, this river is just a tremendous asset into people's lives, into local economies, into the communities that not only live right along it, but are regionally connected to it. But then there are places where those values are still not available to people. And so there's a question of equity. And like so many things that have been sort of brought to public attention, into the center of public debate now, we see that those are often communities of color and underserved communities who, again, in this environmental question, this set of environmental questions here, have not been equally served by the investments and by the actions we've taken. And so there's many that are, believe that additional action can be taken, and we can get those benefits in this stretch of the river, this fairly, I think, manageable 27-mile stretch of a 200 and something mile river. And it's especially important, I think, both from a justice perspective and an economic perspective, that we undertake this work, and that we connect clean water and the values that it can provide to newly developing opportunities for recreational enjoyment and economic growth. I will say I want to reinforce the idea that people are returning to this river already, right? I mean, rivers are irresistible in many ways. And so there's a public health obligation, I think, that as the public and communities sort of organically return to using this river and to making it a central part of their lives, as they have for hundreds of years. I mean, the cities of Philadelphia and Camden were built around these rivers. And Don, when we paddle on the river, will always tell us stories about people paddling back and forth between the two cities and the communities that were built there, and all the both characters, villains, and poets that were in those paddle trips, but had this connection to the river and how it was so central. And then lastly, and this is where the great minds at Penn come in, that there's an opportunity here through this project to develop a strategy for reducing that pollution. But as we undertake that work, we need to work with people representing all aspects of its use, all the communities that have a connection, that have a right to clean water, and that can benefit from the outcomes of our work. Can I have the next slide, please, Erica? This is just a great, I love the shot. I love this pier. This is a graffiti pier. This is one of Don's trips, which was just an amazing series of days when he led us down the river, and we talked about the history. We talked about the future and the vision we had for this river, and how we might finish the work that's been undertaken by so many and invested by so many. This is now going into public ownership, and it's going to be a park and provide access to the river, right? Again, tremendous amount of work and energy by people who live in the communities, who have a great vision for what this river can become. Can I have the next slide, please? Just another way of expressing the goals that Verna was talking about: fair and equitable opportunities to give more people more often enjoying this stretch of the river, where as often is the case, so many people live but are denied the opportunity to fully enjoy the values that are available to a lot of other folks up and down the river and down the estuary. Can I have a next slide, please? The Littoral Society has a long history of connecting people to the coastline, and I'd like to remind people, if they don't know it, that this part of the Delaware River is tidal. So we have again a connection to it, but this idea that we should connect the science and the work that's being done in investigating the solutions to the pollution problems should be brought to the people who are going to benefit from it, and they ought to have a role in considering that science, understanding its implications, and then shaping the strategies that build upon what the science will tell us, what this roadmap will ultimately lead us to. So, our sort of defined role in this is to work with the Water Center at Penn to help translate some of that scientific information that as they produce it, to develop an engagement strategy at each stage of the work. And Carl will talk a little bit more about how they're sort of progressively defining this analysis. And then make sure that people who live in the communities in particular, who are affected by the decisions and the investments that might be made, who share the vision of the potential that might come from this, both in the opportunities to swim in clean water, the opportunities to have clean water aid in the revitalization and the growth of our cities, the regrowth in many cases, that they have an opportunity to participate in the review and provide feedback on the work that's being done. Could I have the next slide, please? And part of that really foundationally for us is this idea that river users and the communities that live next to rivers are experts. I mean, they have understanding of natural history, of the way the river moves, the way the life of the river, in essence, that qualifies them as experts. And all too often in our public policy development, those folks get left out of the process. So we really are consciously trying to start this process by engaging and providing opportunities for them to be involved. Again, identifying, connecting them, providing a space to provide additional input and insights to the Water Center at Penn and feedback to other stakeholders. And I don't want to steal Carl's thunder, but they really have, I think, shown who they are by this idea that they invite this kind of feedback, right, to both inform their work, but also to help build support for the ultimate implementation of it, because this is very much the beginning of what might be a fairly long next chapter in the revival of this river. So we need to have the relationships, stewards, people who are vested in the full recovery of this river to carry forward that additional work and in the implementation of the roadmap as it gets developed. The next slide. And these are just images, but there's a young woman who, was involved in one of the programs to reconnect kids to the river. And we do, for a number of this, we've done some work with Jim Davies, around just the fact that folks live, and kids in particular, that live close to the river that may not have any ongoing connection to it or understanding of the life that's in it, of as Rachel Carson said, sort of that sense of wonder about the diversity and the secrets of water and rivers. And this is really, when it comes down to a great motivation for us to make sure that those communities gain value from this project, from all of this work that we do along these lines. And then the next one, and I will turn it over to Carl for the real science on this. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. And hi, everybody. And Tim, I'm on board with pretty much 100% of what you just said, with the exception of the great minds comment, because I really want to manage people's expectations for the next 10 minutes or so. So I'll take that one under advisement. Hi, everybody. I'm Carl Russick. I'm the Director of Programs and Applied Research at the Water Center at Penn. We're really a very multidisciplinary applied research entity at Penn. We're only a few years old. We're a little over 2 years old. And we've got a team of people both within the university and outside the university working on this project. And very excited to be here and eager to talk about what we're up to. Next slide. So the project overview, as we're framing it and as we're performing it for our funder, William Penn Foundation. It's an independent, science-based feasibility study on improving water quality to achieve swimmable waters for that 27-mile stretch at Philadelphia, Camden, and Chester that Verna and Tim both both described. For people who are familiar with how the DRBC designates the river, this is zone 3 and upper zone 4 of the Delaware River. Next slide. The project team, it's led by the Water Center at Penn, including some support by Andy Cricken, who's serving as a senior advisor to us, who's on the call, and several other folks who I noticed are on the call from our project team. We're supported by Michael Baker International, which is a top 50 global civil engineering and planning and design firm, who's helping us out with some of the more engineering focused applications. And the work we're doing is informed by a scientific advisory panel, where we're trying to draw on expertise from throughout the region and people who've worked in the, particularly in the Delaware, people from Drexel and the Academy of Natural Sciences, Westchester, Stroud. And as you might imagine, this requires a significant amount of interaction with the water utilities, Philly Water, CCMUA, Delcora, DRBC, and many other entities. There's a lot of data out there in a lot of different places, and trying to pull out that together in one place is a significant challenge of this project. Next slide. So I put basic there in quotes because they're anything but basic. But if we're going to simplify our work in this project into 3 bullets, this is probably one of the best ways to do it. The first one is, what is the current state of knowledge? What do we understand about water quality in the Delaware with respect to swimmability? And when we're talking about swimmability, it's the general consensus that is about bacteria. That is what why DRBC elects to designate those waters as not swimmable. So what do we know about all the work that's been done over the years by DRBC, by the water utilities, by the regulatory agencies? How can we put that all together and make sure it matches up, given the various types of data there are, and identify where there might be serious gaps? We know that there are serious gaps in our current knowledge, and we know that those are gaps that will need to be filled before we can be comfortable with the where and when is swimmability possible in order to satisfy all the various stakeholders moving forward. Secondarily, as both Verna and Tim mentioned, there is a tremendous amount of work being done by all 3 utilities under their long-term control plans. The primary or a primary source of bacteria is from combined sewer overflows from the 3 cities, given the age of their infrastructure. And, billions of dollars is on tap to be spent over the next 20 or so years in order to address those problems. And, we can anticipate there will be directionally improvement in water quality as those improvements come online. The question is how many days, how soon, and what the overall impact will be as those improvements aggregate. So in essence, essentially, back one, I'm sorry. And the third piece is, identifying where there are opportunities now and where additional opportunities will come to light, and what the costs are associated with these opportunities for additional water quality improvements and for access, right? Because we know that there will be places where the water quality gets better sooner or may be better now. How do those places line up with areas where there is currently access, and access for a broad variety of stakeholders, including the populations who live closest to the river in these 3 cities? And where might there be opportunities for additional access, as Tim mentioned, to take advantage of where the water quality is clean? So there's the science piece, and there's a bit of a long-term planning piece as well. Next slide. What is our part of the study not doing? We are a university, and we're doing applied research. We are not going to advocate for a specific path forward. Where we will make specific recommendations is recommendations for, how to fill the data gaps, which we know we will find. And if we're going to move the ball forward on this topic, there will be data gaps that need to be filled, and this is how they should be filled sooner. That said, we will be putting forth options for stakeholders and policymakers to discuss. We're not going to advocate for specific policy or regulatory changes for the same reasons that we're trying to do this as scientifically informed as possible. We'll let the policymakers duke it out based on what we put out there as possibilities. And we're not going to extrapolate conclusions beyond what the data shows. There will be a limit to what we can state with specificity based on the limitations of the data that are there and what we're able to collect. And so we're going to make sure we don't get out over our skis on that. So if I was going to boil it down into those 3 boxes, that's probably how I would describe it there. Next slide. And, there are this is from a technical standpoint, this is a really meaty project. It's challenging. It's, from a scientific standpoint, it's fun, but it's also pretty fraught because there are a lot of stakeholders with a lot of skin in the game. And so, and from a technical standpoint, some of these challenges are pretty interesting. The first one I'd point out, bacterial data by its nature is hard to work with because, it's very different than working with specific chemical concentrations. Bacteria is alive. And there's a population dynamic that adds an entirely additional component to what we're dealing with in the water. We've got a really complex group of sources, both in number and type. We've got dozens of CSOs on the main stem of the Delaware in Philadelphia, Camden, and Chester. We've got dozens of CSOs on the major tributaries, on both, primarily on the Philadelphia side. And CSOs are not the only source of bacteria. We believe they're a primary source, particularly in wet weather, but there's bacteria there naturally. There are natural sources of bacteria and also anthropogenic sources of bacteria that are not related to CSOs. So how do we parse all that out? How do we determine that relative contribution? That's going to be a challenge. It's interesting, but it's challenging. The third point is just how complicated these receiving waters are. Tim pointed out that this is tidal. It's tidal freshwater, or at least for the time being. It's an area where we've got heavily industrialized, lots of pockets, lots of, back channels, and we've got a 6-mile tidal excursion in some sections in some areas of this section along those 27 miles. So that water moves, it moves around. And since we know that most of our CSO outfall is during wet weather events, the timing is really important as well. Are there CSO outfalls on an incoming tide and an outgoing tide flow? What are the base flows in the river? So putting all that together and modeling it is going to be fun. And compounding that, as you might imagine, doing this project in 2020, we've got a bandwidth issue with a lot of our cooperating stakeholders and agencies. We're working closely with the utilities. We're working closely with the DRBC, but folks are busy and folks are operating with limited resources because of everything that's going on this year. So, putting it all together, we're hoping to, our intention for this project is to really inform a consensus fact set. People may disagree over the path forward. We'll put options out there as to what that path might look like. But it's important that everyone be working from the same set of facts, or at a minimum, know where those additional facts, where those gaps are and how those facts should be filled. Next slide. Back to Verna, I believe.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tim, thank you, Tim and Carl. I think you've done a nice job of sorting through some of the reasons why this is so important and some of the challenges that we're going to face. I believe strongly that this can be done and that it will be worth doing. It will depend on a lot of people. Some of you are on the phone on this webinar, and a whole lot of people who we're beginning to reach out to over the next year. Next slide. The piece of homework that I should have started with is please put in the chat your name and email if you're interested in continuing to be involved with this, or if you have any ideas or any thoughts. One of the things that we are absolutely, as Tim said, determined is to make sure that this project benefits underserved communities, that the economic advantages are spread, and that frankly is, again, just to repeat myself, these are times when the river being a respite and a place for people to take their families and to relax and to picnic and to wade is very important. So I guess I'll turn it over to Don and just say that we all greatly appreciate the support that Upstream Alliance has provided. We are getting people out. We are getting decision makers out. We had an opportunity to take one of the highest ranking people in the mayor's office of Philadelphia earlier this week. And it is so important and so meaningful when you are on the water and you're seeing the potential for these improvements, because there have been some magnificent improvements, particularly in the Camden area, all done without ratepayers increase.
Well, Verna, thank you. This is terrific. And thank you to all three panel members. And I just want to underscore the importance of this. You know, if I look at the Hollywood Squares here and I look at Urban Promise, putting youth on the water, almost every day before COVID and regularly since COVID, or Upstream Alliance. I mean, many of us are on the water, and this information is going to be very valuable for us to determine how safe is it, and also, most importantly, how we can get on the water more days, because we watch the weather and the rainfall very carefully and look at the CSOs, and when the CSOs flow, then we don't get on the water. So thank you for the hard work and going through this. I have one question, then I want to kind of go to the chat box and call on Charlie after that. But my question is, on this call, we've got expertise from New York, Delaware, and the Chesapeake. And I'm curious, is maybe a question to you, Carl, is are there lessons that the other water systems we have in the Mid-Atlantic can be useful to what we're doing in the Delaware, or is the Delaware just so different that we should just concentrate on the lessons learned there and not look elsewhere?
Oh, I'd say there are certainly lessons to be learned. I mean, this is not, every body of water is unique, and every problem set's unique, every system's unique, but it's not an issue that other cities and other water bodies in the Northeast aren't grappling with. So the state of the science is improving rapidly because of the amount of investment that's going on in this area. So we're certainly planning on taking advantage of some of the work other folks are doing, and also peering over the fence to see what they're proposing as far as potential solutions as well.
Terrific, thank you.
Hey, Don, I would just add to that. Both Philadelphia and Camden have been tremendously progressive movers in solving water pollution problems, right? Even though the problem is not completely solved, the Green Cities Clean Water Program, the work that Andy Cricken and CCMUA and Camden County have done to clean up the water without impacts to ratepayers, there's lessons there as well, right? So we got a good circle to work within as well as to look outside, and And we are absolutely going to bring that perspective of bringing good ideas from wherever we can find them to bear on both sides of the river, and to think of it as one community, right? Unified by that river, ultimately.
The lessons that I've already learned from the Upstream Alliance.
A little louder, Verna, a little closer to the mic. Thank
All right,
you.
thanks. And I just want to add these check-ins have already provided me with information on how things are handled in New York on the harbor. And we were just talking earlier about continuing to talk with folks up there and Walter about how you manage recreation and commercial activity. And I was talking with somebody in the Philly maritime world today. And so it's very important to bring in what we can.
Great, thank you. And Charlie, you got a couple questions. If you want to go off mute, have at it. And while he's taking himself off mute, for those that don't know, every word of every federal bill written on the Chesapeake Bay for 30 years was written by Charlie Stack. So Charlie, it's all yours.
Thanks, Don. Great presentation. Really good presentation. I just wanted to get a better understanding of sort of how this 27-mile section of the Delaware sort of got left out from the improvements, and also to have a better sense for what specifically needs to be done. Is this an environmental infrastructure issue? Is it primarily CSOs and SSOs that need to be addressed in this section that will restore the environmental quality of the river? Or is it something else is it toxic pollutions in this area that also need to be, legacy pollutions? What are the specific things that need to be done? And then finally, is the consent decree enough to do it?
I'll take a stab, and then Tim and Verna, if you want to come in on that. I think I don't think it's a question of framing it as far as this section having been left out. It's that this section had the farthest to go because since the Clean Water Act, the level of improvement in this stretch has been remarkable. But it is and additional improvements continue to be made as far as the level of treatment and managing DO and nutrients and other issues. It's just that the population density and the concentration of outfalls in this stretch makes it the hardest to get to that final level. And it is primarily, we believe, a CSO issue, but that's obviously it's a wet weather issue. Let's frame it that way. CSOs and MS4s. And you've got these CSOs that when these interceptors were put along the river, the CSOs were a design feature that kept the sewage from backing up into everyone's basement, right? But now we're dealing with a different way that we all look at these issues. So and so it's a question of, I think, we've got long-term control plans for Philadelphia, Camden, and Delcora, which is the utility for Chester. And they are, LTCP, it's long-term. It's, 15, 20 years. And there's also, there's a tension there, obviously, between, making the necessary investments and how quickly can you do that infrastructure work, because it is a lot of infrastructure work and a lot of it's distributed across the system. And to what extent can that be done solely, paid for by the ratepayers in 3 of the poorest municipalities in the Mid-Atlantic? So that's, that question of how can you bring in additional resource? How can you be more creative? How can you, how can you optimize within the region, and as far as being opportunistic as far as other ways to bring in capital to do that? That's what this project is largely about.
You asked several questions. I want to just hit one of them, and that's why was it left out, and whether we call it left out or it was not included in the early descriptions, the regulatory document, UAA, states very clearly that it wasn't because of the level of technology, and it is quote unquote anticipated that this will be changed. And the one of the scientists from the Delaware River Basin Commission has a PowerPoint in which he talks about this ability to make changes, and he has that as part of his PowerPoint. So it's clear that this has been something that was expected. It's just, how do we piece it into it? So one of the things that I guess we're trying to say is we want to take it. I'm not sure I like the saying, but one bite of the elephant at a time. I won't attribute that to any particular person, but anyway, we want to take it a step at a time. And there are certain areas where we believe you can make a difference in a short period of time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to follow that up and talking about, and I appreciate the presentation and Carl, the perspective that, you're unbiased, kind of just putting out the facts out there. I'm kind of curious, and maybe it's a question for Tim or Berna, I don't know, but, what are the potential impediments? I mean, you mentioned money. Is that the only impediment in terms of, after you identify these options, in terms of getting the options put in place?
I mean, I think so. I mean, first off, I'll preface this by saying that I think the scientific investigation and the work that the Water Center at Penn will do, building on the investments and the planning and the analysis that have been done, is going to be really important in answering that question, Don, right? So, and part of the work, as I understand it, will be a sensitivity analysis. So understanding the investments that are planned and that are set up and sort of in process, how much they will help us bring the water quality back. Having said that, I mean, I can't help but think, though, that the cities, in particular, will still struggle with the challenges that they face every day in our national political discussion, right? I mean, we need new national investment in this river, and I'm hoping that, as a result of this work, hopefully in part, people come to understand the benefits from that investment, that return on investment, right? That it's that these are communities that, not to diminish the work that's been done, but don't necessarily get the same attention and the same direction of federal resources or even regional resources that they deserve. And that even if you boil it down to sort of raw economics, a clean river and a healthy river is going to do wonderful things for all this waterfront development that's going on right now, which right now is based largely around proximity and a view, right? So if you added the utility of being able to be out on that river, to go from Philadelphia to these wonderful parks that Camden County is building on the back channel on the north side of Camden, think about how those economics will work, because we know that in time and time again, where we've made those investments, it's always come back to us, right? American Rivers has done some wonderful analysis about that idea of rivers as economic powerhouses. And I'll put my real environmental advocate's hat on here. The investments in environmental quality and the role that can play both in people's lives, in peace and comfort in times of pandemic, and in economic revitalization, I think always gets diminished. It's just something about the sort of the status quo that dominates the way we look at these things that doesn't think it's quite as important. But when you really drill into it, and even when it's quantified, and when the economists get a hold of it, they'll tell you that those dollars are usually very, very well spent and well invested. So yes, there's an infrastructure question. Yes, there's an investment question. There's a need for people who benefit from outside the communities that are right on the river to invest in this, and gains that'll come to them, I think, through that investment. So that's part of the challenge, that the science and the options, of a roadmap will help us, take those arguments forward and hopefully change that part of the way the world works right now.
Don, you're on mute.
Don, you're on mute.
Thank you. This is a question actually for Charlie in response to your comment, Tim. In the Chesapeake, Charlie, how much federal money did you steer towards, just kind of in rough figures, towards the cleanup? Because I want to put a pin in that just because, that Delaware gets so little. But how much money were you able to get, Charlie?
I can't really put a direct figure on that. It's been in the billions, billions, unbelievable. The interesting thing about the Chesapeake that maybe it exists on the Delaware, I just don't know, is, there were two drivers initially for the Chesapeake cleanup. Some of it was a constituency, the watermen who were complaining about the crabs, people who lived along had waterfront properties, which were complaining about the pollution, and then sort of a political driver. Senator Mathias, Harry Hughes as governor, that really got themselves engaged, partly because of the political pressures that were motivating them to come up with a plan to restore the river. And those were the early drivers here that were really helpful in starting the process and the early EPA studies and everything else that got the federal government involved to a great extent. And so it's incumbent on the Delaware to sort of have that same thing. It sounds like you have broad-based constituencies out there in different sections of the Delaware River. You're building those constituencies in this area. I don't know if all the political support is there yet for doing this. People are just like me, are just learning about the issues related to this section of the Delaware. I had my youth spending time at Delaware Water Gap, and that's a relatively clean section of the Delaware River, but wasn't really familiar with what was happening down in Philly and Camden in terms of the water quality. But in any case, building those constituencies, getting the political leadership involved at the federal, state, and local level to be engaged in this, I think is absolutely key to having to getting the resources that are necessary.
Well, Charlie, thank you, and we'll knock on wood that whatever happens November 3rd is the best vote for conservation. I won't go any further than that. So, the time is winding down a little bit. What I'd like to do is give the panelists an opportunity for closing comments. If there's anything that you'd like to mention you didn't say, or something you want to leave people with, that'd be great.
So I guess what I will say is get in on the ground floor, because this is the next great chapter in the Renaissance of America's rivers. Look, this is in many ways the birthplace of the country, right? And I have a daughter who lives in Philadelphia, and she's in her mid-20s, and people are coming back to the city, and people are talking about it as a place to invest in. And then there's a consciousness that we need to support and do justice to folks who have been left behind in a lot of ways, and have not gotten some of the benefits. So when you get on that river and you look at the open spaces that are still left and the natural beauty that's there, and you envision riding a ferry from the Philadelphia waterfront over to Camden to a big open green space, it's going to be the place to be. And as I think the Chesapeake, even though it was a long, tough haul, as was Puget Sound and San Francisco Bay and all the other estuaries, and even while none of them are where I would like them to be, significant work has gotten done. But it does start, as Charlie said, with the constituency, people recognizing the values and demanding change to the things that hold us back from those visions. So I thank you guys for helping put a spark to that, and creating this kind of forum to get folks that can help to be involved.
At the end. Carl, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that as we're going through our project over the next several months, we're going to be doing several stops along the way, kind of interim deliverables that we'll be, working with Tim and Verna to distribute to stakeholders to make sure we're getting input as we go through these various steps. So, please stay tuned for that. And we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of, all of the, personal stakeholder and institutional knowledge around these problems. So when we put a roadmap out there, everyone sees themselves as part of it. So please give us your input.
And I would just say, I'm optimistic. We're on the backs, or we're taking off from some strong shoulders. The work that Andy Cricken and folks have done to prove that you can do these things gives you hope. And the ability that Don and his team are bringing into this area to take information and get people out. The work that I shouldn't go through this, I've been taught not to do this, but Jim Cummings and others that have started this, it can make a difference. And I just want to thank Upstream Alliance for helping us get people out to see what can be done.
Well, thank you, Verna and Tim and Carl. And just kind of a closing thought on my own self, and then I'd like to kind of give promotion for the program in 2 weeks. But many of us on this call have seen the Renaissance in Baltimore and the Renaissance in Washington, and seen what clean water has done to those cities. We right now are at the tipping point of that position that we saw, say, in Baltimore in the late 70s, and in DC in the 80s when they built the largest sewage treatment plant in the world of Blue Plains. We're at that tipping point on the Delaware and this 27-mile stretch of the river. And it's an exciting place to be. And Tim, I think you said it very well, is invite people into the ground floor at this exciting moment. So we applaud this work. We are in the business of expeditions, and expeditions, you have maps, and so happy to look forward to the roadmap to be able to guide the expedition of clean water. So thank you all very much for the program tonight, and congratulations on the good work. And just a short promotion, 2 weeks from now, after a week after the election, as I mentioned, I'm hoping that the results will have been ratified, and we'll have a new president, or we'll have a president. And so I don't want to slip there, sorry, because we are nonpartisan. But we'll also have a different playing field, around the country. And so the panel will be a federal and state. We're looking at representatives from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, from Maryland, and DC, Virginia, to give, and at the federal level, perspective as to, well, what does this election mean, the results mean for conservation. So we'll look forward to that on Wednesday, November 11th at 5 p.m. But thanks everyone for joining, and thanks particularly for the panelists for a really wonderful simulating program tonight.